we talk with Michael Alvarez. He's based out of San Francisco and looking for a junior to mid-level role. Our focus of this particular half of the interview is going to be a technical kind of conversation where we don't write any code, but we do ask some questions about React and JavaScript. And so the kind of things I'm looking for are very short and precise answers that get to the heart of what I'm asking. So for example, if I ask about useEffect, not giving multiple paragraphs, but giving a short sentence or two and waiting for me to follow up as needed. It can be really tricky, especially on some of these topics. A lot of people have used them, but may not know the intricacies of that. And for a junior mid role, that might be fine. But for a more advanced role, we're going to look for people to understand why it works, how it works at a really deep level. So there's a couple of questions I might ask here. I'm not necessarily expecting him to have really great answers, but just kind of probing the depth of his knowledge. So we had a ton of fun, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks so much, Michael, for jumping in here. Thanks. I'm really looking forward to this. This is going to be a ton of fun. Could you give us maybe 2 or 3 paragraph kind of overview of kind of where you're at in your career and kind of what you're hoping to get out of this interview?
Yeah. So I'm Michael. I am a front-end web developer. I've been doing front-end for almost 3 years now. I'll be honest, I've been doing it for 3 years of learning insights and only 1 year of experience. I'm kind of based in SF area, and what I'm kind of looking into this whole mock interview is really bring back my muscle memory of how we do interviews and really see where I'm at so that I can work with the interviews that are outside in this world. So that's where I stand at the moment.
Awesome. Well, the format of this interview is going to be 10-15 minutes. I'm just going to give you some questions. We're going to ask about React and Next and JavaScript, and you kind of mentioned TypeScript. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll just be verbal. And then we're going to transition into a short algorithm section, 20-30 minutes on that. And just kind of see where you're at. I think you're going to do awesome at that. I don't think you have any problem answering it, but we'll just kind of see your approach. And you said kind of like a junior role. Is this the kind of what you'll be mock interviewing for, or it sounds like maybe a junior mid, kind of somewhere in there?
On a personal note, I felt like I was going junior, but you know what? After chatting with you, I'm kind of feeling a little junior mid-level aspect to this whole.
Yeah. Well, I will let you know at the end what we would hire you for, and I think that'll give you some good context as well.
The feedback.
Cool. Yeah. Now who knows? Maybe we'll come out with a staff rating. We'll see. We'll see what you get. You never know. So let's get started. So thank you much for coming in and chatting. I think you'd be a great opportunity. I think you might be a great fit for this opportunity. Let's talk a little bit about React. One of the big things that React is kind of known for is how it manages state and those kind of things. So let's talk a little bit about useEffect. What are the kind of different ways you would use useEffect for your React application?
Recent thing that I've been using useEffect was when it comes to event listeners, when it comes to either opening up a modal or scrolling and trying to detect something. A recent project was like a Netflix clone, and the best use case was both when I was inputting and fetching data for the query that I've been searching for a movie, or another option was when I was hovering over a card. I want to see more information in a bigger version of the card within the same target point, which has to use the DOM, which is as an event listener. So those 2 use cases that I see the useEffect.
Interesting. So I know useEffect, the second argument is the dependency array. So what are the different kind of things that you like? There's famously 3 versions of that. You can put some stuff in there, you can have no stuff in there, and you could have nothing. You could not have the dependency array. Do you know what the difference that makes if you have for those 3 different kind of scenarios?
So let me see if this makes sense in my end. So when it comes to using the useEffect and for the dependencies, if you were to have no array or an empty array, it lets you have the useEffect call something only for the initial time, and it won't be used ever again. The second time would be if you have some variables or values or states that you want to update, then you can apply it into the array as dependencies and use it within the useEffect calling it whenever it's necessary or when there's an update to that state or a variable. And then the third one, I don't recall if there's a third one coming in my head. All I know, or one big highlight is it's like when it's mounted is important, and also knowing when it's unmounted. Those are like the two thoughts that comes through my mind when it comes to use effects.
Interesting. Yeah. There's kind of famously two ways to write React components. There's the class-based approach, and then there's the functional approach. To you, how would you kind of describe the differences between those two?
I'm going to go backwards if you don't mind. So going with the functional components, I'm more accustomed to the functional way of coding because that's the more modern way that I've seen for code bases. And that's, oh man, I'm kind of stumped on this one. I'm just going to go with what I think I know, and then you can let me know if it works with this question. So when it comes to using functional components, I noticed that you have either a declarative or an expressive, meaning like the const, the function name, and the arrow functions. And then the other option that you can go for is the class base, and that is considering how you set up your variables, your states, and rendering output. So one of them is more of a function of render, and the other one is considering using a super calling something called super. And that's more the predecessor, like the previous version of using React. Or if you're controlling document.js files, an app.js file, or even error.js file for particular projects like Next.js. That's the only times I've seen it be used.
Context. So what are some times to use context, and what would you use it for?
So for context hooks, the best time to use it is when you realize you're prop drilling through your component to component to component mindset. Once you see that happen, the best use case scenario is to use context. One time that I've used it before was for authentication purposes and reusing the user's name or particular role for conditions, and making sense that that's the best time to store your context information globally for this whole project. Kind of like that next app clone project that I've created before.
Nice. What would you say would be a use case for doing a custom hook?
Okay, so I have two approaches, but I'll give you one of them at least. When I start using forms, for example, and I realize that there's a reusability aspect to the forms, meaning like the input searches or even a drop-down, there's going to be a repetitive pattern that's going through the email input, the password input, even the birth date and the year that you want to do a drop-down. Once you realize that you're doing the similar pattern, let's consider the event.target.value. I could just consider that being a function, and if it's a function, I can also integrate a custom hook there, meaning the value, storing them as an object of values, and I can start using that custom hook for that example of being a form. Once I realize there's a functionality to this and I can reuse it multiple times for whatever values I'm trying to save and collect, that's the best time I see that custom hook is used for.
And so I was just kind of looking over your resume here, and I noticed here that it says TypeScript. And so can you kind of tell me what you like about TypeScript and don't like about TypeScript versus just regular JavaScript?
I'll give you a little context behind what got me interested in TypeScript and why I started using it more and more for my projects. So it came from the first class that I took for JavaScript learning. And one thing that my professor or my instructor taught me was, when thinking about coding, think about what is implicit and what is explicit, meaning what is literally what you wrote in code that makes sense to you, and what are things that aren't being read in code but it's happening regardless. So JavaScript, it gives you that kind of spaghetti feeling of everything's available to you, there's no problem, so it's out and open for you to use. But when you start using TypeScript, you start thinking about, wait a minute, this variable name is a string. That's obvious. But let's just write it anyways. Maybe I'm using React, so I'm thinking about that array that I'll be getting from the fetch data. All right, well now I know it's an array, and I'm fetching data that's just going to be lots of objects. Let's be more specific. What kind of items are we coming from with that object? And therefore, I'm getting more in tune with every predictive output that I'm expecting to get when using TypeScript versus JavaScript. That's kind of like the best reason why I started liking TypeScript. The dislikes, using that any word, that beautiful any, that's also, let's call it a freebie pass if you are really new to it. But once you start really trying to be really good with what you're knowing and not knowing, that's when it becomes also trickier, especially with APIs. So kind of getting my head around how to be sure with my success outputs with TypeScript and also the error output of TypeScript.
Thanks for giving me that. One last kind of question we'll ask about before we kind of go into getting our hands dirty and writing some code, and I know you're excited about it, is let's talk about testing. Have you written kind of any tests, and what would you say are like the main types of tests?
I've only done it twice and limited with React projects, but it was with either Jest or Jasmine. Those are kind of like my go-to when it comes to testing. I like the specificities of use cases. It's all about figuring out your best case scenarios and your worst case scenarios, but being really focused on the worst case scenarios, because not everyone thinks of that as a front-end developer, but those are the highlights to also think about when it comes to building out any components, features, whatever you think for logic.
What would you say is, in your opinion, the biggest difference between something like an integration test or an end-to-end test and a unit test?
So let's see, end-to-end test, a unit test, and integration test. I'm still kind of new to those words, but my understanding is when it comes to APIs, I just have to be considerate with the output that's coming in and the input that I'm sending or requesting for end-to-end testing. I just think of the full story or feature that I'm building here. So figuring out what I expect from the onboarding process or the user flow of starting point all the way to the end point of what should come out. And maybe even the, kind of like the branches scenarios of the best case scenario, worst case, and anything else is in between. And then for the unit testing, I kind of forgot what that word is. So
that's fine. We'll talk a little bit about it in the debrief, but I that is thanks for that already. What you gave me there, that was great. Let's switch over to everyone's favorite part, which is the algorithm portion. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this to you, and while I do, I'm going to give kind of anyone kind of listening an understanding of why we're doing algorithms and not just doing a React one. And this is just my opinion. But I think it is, I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with the React tricks and kind of how to do use effects and use state, but they may not have spent a lot of time actually writing JavaScript. And so I think this is an opportunity to showcase familiarity with the language, as well as understanding how they problem solve. And I think both of those in some ways are more universal and more useful than just being able to use React. Because if you're really great at JavaScript and don't know React, I could teach React. But it's really hard to just take someone who only knows React and then start at the very basics of JavaScript.